Whoa, we are live.
So you should be live, or it's like rendering or whatever the word would be.
Yeah, it takes a little while before the video shows up, but it says live right there.
Okay, I think we're good here.
Oh, there we are.
Let's see. Just gonna give it a title. So as guys start to filter in, we'll give them a second.
Sure. Stephen Lee, psyched for a new guest.
Yes. So this will also be we'll see how many people in my my channel know who you are.
Yeah, someone going Jake and Solomon.
We'll see how much crossover there is.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see actually. Like, do all the contrarians like flock together?
Yeah, this is the Pokenomics from the Yu-Gi-Oh world. We've got. All right. Let me just set up another thing. We'll wait another second or two. So I guess as people come in and I just set up the thumbnail, if you can just kind of like introduce yourself to people coming in, yeah, that'd be great.
So, what's up? My name is Maxime. I run the Solemn Yu-Gi-Oh channel and the Solemn Vanguard channel. I own a software company called Solemn Tones. I like to just put Solemn in front of every hobby I have and try to make it work.
Good branding.
Exactly. So yeah, my Yu-Gi-Oh channel is all about collecting and investing, usually a bit of both. So there's some cards I will never sell. There's some cards I will gladly sell if there's like a solid profit, or I'm at a point where I'm like, this isn't even justifiable for me to keep holding, if that makes sense. I try to be very anti-hype, I guess. Like, I will hype the markets in the sense that long term, I do think some of these cards will appreciate nicely because I do think there's organic collectability there. But I'm also trying to push against the euphoria that we kind of saw in 2020. So I try to have a healthy mix of both, and I try to also teach some like fundamental concepts about, you know, having an emergency fund, being sure that you have proper assets beyond collectibles if you're looking at it from an investment perspective, because it's something that a lot of people aren't really pushing. And I find that very dangerous. Like, people who are saying, oh, diversify your portfolio, that means buying some modern and some vintage. It's like, maybe not.
Yeah. It's a highly questionable opinions, and from people who have probably all of their money in the same thing that they're telling you to buy. So maybe a little bit of self-interest going on in some of those, some of what they're encouraging you to do and encouraging, you know, you to put your money into. Yeah, where, I guess just to start, and if people want to start leaving questions, so Solemn Yu-Gi-Oh does know a little to some about Pokemon, so we can definitely talk about Pokemon today.
Yeah.
I think general market questions about what happened this year would be great for us to discuss if you guys have questions about that, and also Yu-Gi-Oh questions. There's a lot about Yu-Gi-Oh. I'm starting to learn more about Yu-Gi-Oh, getting more into Yu-Gi-Oh. But I'm buying a bunch of, I was just telling Solemn Yu-Gi-Oh here, I was buying a bunch of like cheap Korean Yu-Gi-Oh, so I can just get the vintage opening experience for very, very cheap. Amazed that those are like $18 a box, $20 a box, and you can, you know, open the same LOB cards.
Yeah, exactly.
Get that feel. And I do that just so that I can get a sense. I always do this, and I talk about this on my channel. From any hobby that I'm entering for the first time, I try to do a lot of research before I buy anything, particularly during a hot period such as this. And I try and buy cheap stuff that will allow me to figure out how much I enjoy this, how much I want to spend, where I want to put my money, where I want to start with, that sort of thing. something I always recommend. So I guess just to start, can you give us just like a brief overview of what you think has happened this year in the Yu-Gi-Oh market? And it's probably very similar to the Pokemon market, but and where you think Yu-Gi-Oh is at kind of today, right now, and maybe what you see happening in the future.
So I think the whole timeline really starts in 2016, which I think is very similar for a lot of these cards. You had Alpha Investments coming onto the scene with MTG. You had Pokemon, getting its boom, let's say, from Pokemon Go again. Obviously, these IPs have been very active in many people's minds, in millions of people's minds beyond that, but you do have very discernible moments where things really pop off. And I want to say 2016 was a pretty major one. So you saw Alpha Investments, you saw Pokemon Go boom, you saw SM Pratt heading onto the scene. Not in the same like scale as Rudy, but it added a level of, how do I say, like basic concepts that are being like put into people's minds. So 2016 is also where those Yugi tubers, let's say, started covering a lot of the vintage Yu-Gi-Oh. So I guess either partially inspired by Alpha Investments and the Pokemon scene, or either it's just, I don't know, maybe there's a certain age where that becomes important, where a game needs to have that age before it really starts getting big. I know Yu-Gi-Oh was graded before this, but 2016 was really major. So then you had, a little bit of not a downslope, but some cool-offs. As you saw across all those markets, you saw Alpha no longer selling consistently as high, that the hype was kind of slowing down. And then 2020 is when all of those markets really just popped off again. Some people have various theories, whether it's because everyone was inside, whether everyone had stimulus checks. But yeah, suddenly you had this collectibles resurgence, and it's not even cards only, it's all collectibles, like stamps and coins and all collectibles. So obviously then in October you had Logan Paul blowing up Pokemon even more, but well before that, all of these markets were already like pumping up and up and up. So Yu-Gi-Oh just saw that same growth. And I feel like because of Pokemon, you also had people going, hey, Charizard is now worth this much. What happened to, and then the other IP that they really loved as a kid. So you saw a lot of that. I feel like cross-pollination is what I often called it. So yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Just saw very similar trends to Pokemon, where all the collectibles went up, and then the Logan Paul thing happened, so the collectibles went up even more, cards specifically at that point. So I think a lot of that growth, the rate of growth is not sustainable, in the sense that you can't have 30% up every month. That just doesn't happen. But I do think a lot of these markets have found like new lows, in the sense that a lot of people who were always, in love with these IPs have refound that passion. So where a lot of people are saying, oh, these prices are going back to 2018 and it's all going to zero, I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think we'll stabilize at lower fundamental levels, just because of the sheer amount of new people and interest you have created, as well as the price memory. So I hope that kind of establishes where I feel we're at.
Yeah. I definitely agree with your take. I mean, I think it's all about the timeline, trying to figure out the timeline of what that looks like, how big the retraces are, if and when they happen, and then how long the retraces last. Is it going to be a quick recovery for certain vintage cards? Is it going to be a very slow recovery, or is it not going to recover? And is this going to be a little bit of a TCG fad, and it's going to die a little bit? And I sure hope not. And I think that, but I think you have to take that seriously.
Yes.
As a possibility when you're putting your money into something like this. That being said, I think there's so many guys like you and I that I don't see it happening, particularly for the older rare stuff, and the demographics. Let's just having more money to spend on this sort of stuff, and just the rarity of certain items. But I think it's why rarity is so important, which I know both you and I talk about. So just to give maybe the audience an overview of what are those rare items in Yu-Gi-Oh? What are those high demand but also kind of rarer items or rather than specific items necessarily, just kind of categories. Like I would talk about first edition base, the Neos, Wizards of the Coast. What are the sets or eras or editions and or trophy cards that are generally the most desirable, and those things that you would expect maybe to have more of that K-shape recovery, even if they dip, just to give the audience a review.
So I think there's two major categories, and you kind of already spoke about them. First of all, you have the set cards, and secondly, you have the prize cards. So prize cards automatically have that massive amount of extra scarcity that will help them. So you have Shonen Jump prize cards, you have YCS prize cards, you have Worlds prize cards, and there's a few other little things around that. But I would say those three categories are like big ones. You have the Worlds prize cards that are literally less than 8. It's kind of comparable to your Pikachu's, like 1, 2, 3, and so forth. You have similar Worlds prize cards that have like Pop 1, Pop 3, Pop 6, and so forth. The problem is with Yu-Gi-Oh! That all those cards are completely unknown. They are not Blue Eyes. They are not Dark Magician. They are not Time Wizard. They are, here's a warrior you've never seen in your life. So you have the World's Prize cards, and they are expensive. Like, they are multiple 5 figures. But because no one has ever seen these cards before, like a regular person just doesn't know about them, I feel like the demand there is very, very niche, like super specific. So then you have your Shonen Jump prize cards, which are more known because you have, for example, a Crush card, which is super known from the anime. You have a Cyberstein, which is super known because at the time that it came out, it was game breaking. So every single player knows that card because it just ruined lives. And then once you move away from the trophy cards, which is very similar to Pokemon and not similar to MTG, I feel like MTG doesn't really have as much of a trophy prize card thing going on as Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Then you head into your set cards, which is literally like, your first edition, first set. For us, that would be LOB. For Pokemon, that would be the base set. So LOB first edition is generally seen as the set, the one everyone hypes up and goes after. But you have other sets that came after LOB that are almost just as loved. And that's a pretty important distinction, I feel, because when Pokemon came out, you had your base set, and then they printed way more of what came after, right? Like Fossil, Jungle, Team Rocket even. Those sets were, as far as I'm aware, way more printed than first set base. For Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's kind of the case, as far as I'm aware. We don't have print numbers, but we do notice, like, hey, there's a lot of, like, there's more tens of this than other sets. But it's not as over the top. Like, if you look at population numbers of sets after, they are still relatively low compared to Pokemon and compared to LOB. So I feel like there's more collectability in something like Metal Raiders, Magic Ruler, Pharaoh, Servant, and so forth compared to Legend of Blue Eyes, our first set, than if you were to compare to first set base and Fossil, Jungle, like that relative.
Maybe a little bit like Neo or E-Series for us, or the...
Yes, yes, exactly. Though I do have to say, if you want to compare Neo or E-Series, as far as I'm aware, Pokemon entered a moment of not being as popular, and so less were printed, and also it's harder to pull them in tens, if that's correct or not.
Yeah, well, so Neo, yes, definitely harder. E-Series not harder to pull in 10, actually easier to pull in 10 generally, but just a lot less of the product. And E-Series definitely very like Pokemon had mostly had largely died during that period. Neo still fairly popular, I would say, but definitely not as popular as, like Team Rocket was probably like the height of popularity, part of why probably there's so many product, we think. So much
right. So the thing with Neo is like your second season, right? Like Johto region.
Yeah.
And then your E-Series is when you head into Ruby and Sapphire Hoenn, as far as I'm aware, right? Or is that not yet there?
So E-Series is still all first gen, second gen.
Oh, okay.
The Nintendo EX original era will be the third gen. And the E-Series is like it's not first appearances of Pokemon anymore, like the Neos and the earlier sets. It's just kind of like cool, different art style of the Pokemon we already knew, we already had. and it has all the big hitters from first gen and second gen in it.
Okay, I see. So, because the thing is, like, Yu-Gi-Oh has another era that is no longer the first one, so it could be seen as its Johto or its Hoenn, which is Yu-Gi-Oh GX, where they introduced a new rarity, which was infinitely harder to pull. Like, we're talking about, oh, you're looking for ultimate rare, literally here, like Cyber End Dragon. Okay, open a whole case and you might pull one. Like that level of hard to pull. And those are also very coveted because it was kind of like not peak Yu-Gi-Oh as far as little kids go, but peak Yu-Gi-Oh as far as players go and the amount of people going to events and all of that.
So you get 2 ultimate rares a booster box, but there are a lot of different ultimate rares. So to pull the good ultimate rare that is challenging and difficult. And my understanding is that there's quite a disparity in price between the top ones and you know the ones that people are extremely upset when they open from that GX era.
Yes, but it gets even worse because you have a different in boxes. You have boxes that were made specifically to support local game stores, and you have boxes that were sent to, you know, Walmart and Target and so forth. And so those hobby boxes, yeah, exactly.
And like Cyber End is only in the hobby box version,
exactly,
that type of thing.
Exactly. So you not only need to, you know, open a whole case to find it, but you need to open a correct box, basically, a hobby box, just to have a chance. And even then, the ultra rares. So you know how there's multiple rarities, and ultra is like the highest, not ultimate. Ultra rare ultimate rares are actually even harder to pull. So if you look at a uncut sheet, because we have those, you can actually see the Cyber End Dragon maybe once, while you may see the the regular Cyber Dragon maybe 3 times on that same sheet. So it gets really like you have all these layers on top of layers that make certain ultimate rares extremely hard to find, and that does add a price to them, let's say. So it's a bit different than Pokemon in that regard, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, like I would say not until Gold Stars and the Shinings a little bit and the Crystal cards a little bit. But those are definitely easier to pull than these cards. Mm-hmm. But when you got into Gold Stars, I think then you started to look at similar-ish pull rates. I think that's part of why you see such high prices for Gold Stars, despite them maybe not being as, having that nostalgic connection to people, and most adults coming back and don't even know about them yet. I think over time, there's going to be more affinity and connection to those. But
actually, I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had here, because I started with Hoenn.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, you know, when all of these Hoenn cards and these Diamond and Pearl cards, and I want to be very careful because I do believe that first gen will completely keep on destroying Hoenn. So I'm not trying to go like, I get this question a lot in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where they're like, what about the later seasons? Will this become vintage? And I'm like, yeah, but vintage will be more vintage. So I do want to be careful there. But I feel like there's people like me who came into Hoenn and like, oh, Lugia, that's cute, but we had Rayquaza. That's so much cooler. And so I'm wondering how many people are in that mindset and if that will evolve or not. Because like those Gold Stars, the Rayquaza, it's like, wow, I would take it over Lugia.
I think age in itself is an overrated fundamental often. Mm-hmm. And I think age is generally combined with rarity, but not always. And I think that that's part of what we're getting at here. So a lot of the times we think the oldest stuff is going to be the most valuable, in part because it's the stuff that probably was kept in the worst condition, got beat up, got open, the most. And so it's very rare. So I think that can be a misconception of like, well, there can be newer stuff or middle generation stuff that is just as rare potentially as some of the, and to get into getting like a PSA 10, for example, as maybe base set or jungle or fossil. And so then you have a conversation about demand, right? And that's where it comes into that demand part of like, will first gen always have the more demand, more interest than, third, fourth, fifth gen Pokemon? And I think that it's been overrated. I think that yes, but I think that the price gap didn't make sense, although now it's really closed. And I actually think that I'm shifting back the other way. And so this is often what happens in collectible hobbies is something gets way too high, then something kind of responds and maybe gets a little bit too close to it, and then that thing pulls away again. And I think that's where having that price, that experience with the prices, and that knowledge of all of the people in the hobby, or trying to get as much knowledge as you can about like the different collector categories within the hobby and how niche certain things are, can help you like make those decisions of like, what do I think should be the ratio between, you know, these Gen 1 cards and these Gen 3. And I imagine it's the exact same conversation in Yu-Gi-Oh! In terms of what should these like LOB first edition cards, you know, be worth versus some of these, you know, GX Ultimates, you know, first editions. So one question I had for you was, what do you think? So playability definitely plays a part in Yu-Gi-Oh! Value, because a lot of the fans of Yu-Gi-Oh! Played the game and became connected to the cards through playability. Also the anime and nostalgia and connection to like, because they actually have these cards on the screen. There's an added level of collectability and connection. How do you feel, you know, and if you can throw out a percentage, which is ridiculous, but what do you think matters more now? And what do you think is going to matter more in the future? And do you think that over time it's going to shift away from playability towards playability? Do you think it's at a place where it's always going to be in terms of the value of playability versus do you think about that sort of stuff? I think that's interesting in Yu-Gi-Oh!
I do think about that. I think it's like when a card comes out, it's 100% playability. It's not even close. It's like, oh, this lightning storm is super strong. It's worth $120 because of how super strong it is. And then they reprint it a billion times and then it goes down in value because everyone can now get it and the rarity doesn't really matter. However, there are certain cards that were used in the anime and were also super powerful in the game that people do remember playing with those because of how good they are. And so I do think it's like a very weird curve where I have an example. I have a Monster Reborn here, which is like you revive a monster and that was super strong. And even to this day, it's not really played much now. Is it still limited? I don't know. But back then, every deck played it. And so everyone knows like, oh, I played with this. I want this now in the highest rarity and so forth. And so that does help it a lot. There are lesser played Magic cards that aren't the same price purely because it was never played with. But I don't think playability by itself will matter because, again, looking at playable cards from 10 years ago, they don't tend to perform in similar fashion to Monster Reborn. So I do think it's like a both. I think playability adds to it, but it can't be the only legacy, let's say.
Are there examples of cards that are very expensive that have no playability, but just excellent connection? Or did they always make... Okay, so that was never playable?
Actually, it's very funny. The one time it was hyper playable was 2016. That was 14 years after its release. Yeah.
That's so surprising.
So this card was really, really bad because, well, without getting into very specifics, tributing two monsters to make a thing without any abilities is just dumb. So it was anime. You were like, wow, but in actuality, it didn't really do much. But in 2016, they made all these cards that did broken things as long as you had the name. So nothing that it did mattered as long as you could have the name Blue Eyes White Dragon. So this might as well have been a 0 attack, 0 defense card. And it doesn't really matter what's on the card as long as it had a name. And so having that name mattered a lot in that deck and it became really good. But so its price clearly didn't come from that little competitive season. It was literally just all the age of the anime. Right.
And so that's where it gets into that question of, to me, is it the playability that's driving the price? Or is it just happened to be that some cards had the playability? You know, because my mind would go, well, the most expensive card is the Blue Eyes White Dragon, you know, the most expensive red card. And it has 0 playability. Is it playability at all that matters on the vintage side? You know, because I've always struggled to understand. First of all, most of my like hardcore player friends like are not big collectors. They just like don't have the collector gene like I do. And it's more of like they like having some cards and some cards have sentimental value, but it's just not quite the same thing. So it gets in this interesting position of like, why does something, and an interesting conversation, why does something being playable make you want to have it in really high grade or make you want to have it? And how does that work? And are you a player at all of Yu-Gi-Oh? I know you're a big Vanguard player.
So I played competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Like I have mats from topping when I was like 12, so to speak. So I was a very competitive player in the GX era. So I wasn't very competitive in the Dual Monsters era, which is the first one, because I was too young, like I was 6 or something. So, but later on, I became quite competitive in the GX era. And so I think it matters because the cards got allure from how strong they were. So a very good example of that is, for example, in GX, you had Dark Armed Dragon. It was insane. It was tier 0. Like no other deck stood a chance against that deck. And that card, even back then, was like $200. Like $200 back in the day for a card was insane. So you couldn't afford it. You saw the best players winning with it, and you had like, wow, if I had a Dark Armed Dragon, wow, I could win all of these events just like this pro. And so that allure built up that card. And so now it's nowhere near like a Blue Eyes or anything like that. But right now, it's still worth a lot in mint condition in the PSA 10 for that reason, because there's people like me who back then couldn't afford it, always wanted to have it. It was part of the best players. And like, yeah, I don't know. It created this reputation for certain cards.
Sure. Yeah. It makes me think like I would wonder, and this is from a Yu-Gi-Oh newbie, but if over time, what is going to drive the market? Is it going to be people coming back into Yu-Gi-Oh who played it as a kid, who are looking for nostalgia and want to buy the cards that they remember? Or is it going to be people who are more from the anime and are getting into Pokemon or other sorts of things and come back and don't care about it, and so are going to go to just the cards they remember from the anime and that sort of connection?
I think the anime is still going to be the #1 driver, which is why I think that the first era will keep on beating GX despite its rarity, because I feel like I'm trying to think of I call it on my channel CEO Bobby, the guy who's like super wealthy. He's 40. He wants to show off to his friend, like, oh, I bought this crazy thing. And I feel like the thing he will remember is the Blue Eyes White Dragon, the Dark Magician. He wasn't necessarily playing at these events, which, were relatively small. Even if your event had 200 people, that's only 200 people. Even if it's 800, that's only 800. Whereas every kid was watching television. Every kid was watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Pokemon on 4Kids and so forth. So I do think the anime will keep on being the driver. I just think that people who stayed invested in the game, like throughout all those decades, people like, I kind of fell out in certain eras, but people like me who played competitively back then do have some extra connection to those playable cards because they have both. They know the anime and the playability, but that's like more niche, if that
makes sense. Both, and to your first point, makes a lot of sense, right? So the playability of a card builds its price point initially, which is going to help probably in the long term. Although I imagine you might see something like that be more likely to stagnate, where the more just collectible kind of, Blue Eyes White Dragon type card, even if it started a bit lower because it wasn't playable, and before things were as collectible, it was like maybe people would even pay more money for, or I don't remember the history of the game, obviously, I don't know, but the price points of these things. But I think over time, and my personal perspective is that people are underestimating that the new market is mostly collectors. And I hear this in the Magic the Gathering community. And I also think it's why I was not very bullish on Magic the Gathering and very bullish on Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And things like that. Because I see it being driven by collectors who have connections to the characters, not through playing, but through video games and anime and a number of things, and also the cards.
Yes, I feel the same way.
To see how that's going to flesh out over time. I think that clearly that's what has happened this year, and why you see Magic the Gathering on every shelf, and but I do wonder when we see a retrace and how much of those collectors stay versus is it more of the players who are more here forever, and do the collectors stay forever? I think it'll be interesting to watch how that all happens.
Yeah, me too. I think often the way I see it, Pokemon is like 100% into the collectors, right? Like the players, obviously it matters, but like the way.
Not with modern Pokemon, similar.
Yeah, of course.
And during this period, yes, but this period is an anomaly. Like before this period, usually, unless there's like a Charizard or some sort of like really secret rare popular Pokemon, often the most expensive cards was like the Crobat, right? The playable Crobat, or the Shaman EX,
yes,
Soaring Skies, that sort of thing, as you know. But certainly but I think it'll be interesting to see, if that has shifted in Pokemon, and if that shifts for good, and if they start to cater more to the collectors through sets like Hidden Fates, right, and through upping the shinies and all these things versus catering more to just that player side. But I'm sorry I cut you off.
I actually do think that the Shaman EX is a really good example of how it kind of plays out in Yu-Gi-Oh as well, because Shaman EX was like super expensive. It was D card. It's like comparable to Dedenne GX, I want to say, from right now, or maybe a year ago or so, where everyone put it in because you put it on your bench and you start popping off. Like I played the Mew 3 deck in the game, so I'm aware of that. But so where everyone played it in their deck, and so it was, wow, you have a Shaman, wow, crazy, if you were like at a local game store. But then when it rotated out, it just crashed because a lot of its value was in its playability. But I feel like if you're then first of all, a Shaman fan, someone who played competitively at that point and wants to go back to that, I feel like Shaman will end up aging well, if that makes sense. Not necessarily as base set or something, obviously not there, but I do think there's an argument there, and I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is in a comparable state on a lot of its cards, if that makes sense.
I think one interesting thing to look at is something like some certain level X cards that were very playable, like the Uxie level X, like that maybe aren't the most popular Pokemon, but did seem to have a premium, and certain players really wanted them because they remembered that being the first card they ever played with. And so I do think that adds some collectability. The question is how much, and the question is how many players actually collect, and all these sorts of things. And we'll see that over time. I think it's all important and interesting stuff to speculate on and wonder in these conversations. So before we go into questions, and if you guys want to start asking some questions, we'll jump into the chat after this. The other topic I wanted to talk about was reprints, because I think reprints are really interesting. The way that Konami handles reprints, and talking a little bit about that and the value of reprints. It'd be interesting to have a discussion in Yu-Gi-Oh to see what's happened there, and maybe versus what's sort of happened with Pokemon, where there are far less reprints. And also, where we're, we could talk a little bit about evolutions and the reprint, what happened there, and unlimited versus first edition, and sort of unlimited being printed a lot. So if you can give just like an overview, if it's possible, on what Konami has done over the years with the vintage, with the GX era, and so on, how they've handled all of that printing.
So there's two ways reprints happen. First of all, specific cards get reprinted because they are so strong and people need them in their decks. So, if you have a certain card, Ash Blossom or something like that, it came out, it was $60. You needed 3. That's $180 for 3 cards in your deck. People don't want to spend $800 on a deck forever, and then those prices start adding up. So they reprint specific cards in new products in lower rarities so that there's a less of a barrier to entry to start playing the game. So that is bad for value, in the sense that if that Ash Blossom that I just mentioned got all her value from playability, then during that reprint she goes down, and so she went from 60 to 30 or something like that. So if you were speculating on that card, well, you lost 50% of your money right there. So that happens.
We have the same thing in Pokemon. If I'm sure you're aware, but one example is like the Tapu Lele boxes that were released at GameStop and all over the place to bring down the value. Same thing happened there.
Yes, exactly. But you guys do it less. You guys have usually like a tin, right? Where it's like, oh, this one chase card, we're printing it. Whereas Yu-Gi-Oh will literally go like, oh, here's an entire set with only reprints. So it's very... I'd say it's maybe different. I feel like usually you do your reprints in a tin for one card, rather than, complete sets just redoing it. But beyond that, you also have reprints for unlimited, which means they'll take an entire set and just re-release it again. The thing is, though, that while Pokemon may sometimes do that for certain sets, like they did with Hidden Fates, as far as I'm aware, we in Yu-Gi-Oh at least then don't have the first edition stamp on it. So they will keep on pushing out unlimited after unlimited after unlimited if it's possible, like if it's popular enough, for example with Legend of Blue Eyes. But then at least you know, okay, it's not the first edition, it's made in 2017, not in 2002.
Are there patterns to the reprints in terms of what set that they choose? Popularity and selling?
So far we mostly see like Walmart push out like Metal Raiders and LOB, which were like those very first sets. I guess that's the type of thing that you reprint because you know, oh, there's a casual fan who grew up on Yu-Gi-Oh and now wants to open a pack and see their favorite old cards again. So those types of things have been reprinted in Unlim, but beyond that, it doesn't really happen much. Like you won't randomly see an Unlim booster box from 2015 be reprinted, if that makes sense. That doesn't really happen much.
Okay. So yeah, so LOB and Metal Raiders the most. And what is the cycle like? Like I've heard every 2 years. I've heard before some people mentioned to me.
So there's not really specific cycles. Like you had your first print of LOB in 2002. You had some others 2002, 3, 4. But usually those were in specific products. So for example, in 2004 or 5, you had the Master Collection, which was this little binder which had 1 pack of each in it. So that was like a reprint, but that's not as massive scale. However, what happened in 2010 then was they brought the Legendary Collection. So it was once again 1 pack of each. And then at one point, I don't know what the specific year was. Some people say 2014, others say 2017. But at one point they just said, well, we'll just keep doing that. And then they started going pack after pack after blister. So I don't know when the waves really happen, but whenever you walk into a Walmart, they are stocked. So it doesn't seem like they ever quit.
One thing that I try to warn people about evolutions is that, you know, in Yu-Gi-Oh, right, there's tons of reprints of the same art, you know, the Blue Eyes, with all these crazy shinies that looks like it would be a fortune and it's $1 or, you know, or $2 or these sorts of things. And, you know, one thing that I don't think people think about enough who are investing really heavily into evolutions, for example, is if Pokemon decides to just keep reprinting base set in other iterations or reprinting those same arts or reprints that Charizard art again, right? It just adds a lot more supply. And when we see, if we look at the value of what's happening in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's more comparable to things like comic books and other sorts of things where the original first edition, Blue Eyes in PSA 10, you know, it was shilled, right? We can talk about that too. But what is the price, the going rate for one of those you think is a fair price?
So for people who don't know the history, the card basically gradually grew to around 40. And I mean, not gradually, like you still had to Euphoria, but given everything else, it grew to 40 with actual demand there. And then it got chill bit to 85. It was paid for, and then someone else paid 85 based on that auction. But then privately, people tried selling at that price and no one was actually, you know, offering that amount. I do know of a sale that's higher than 40 but less than 85, so that happens. And I also know basically there's 2 card stocks. Some people will say there's more. Well, you have wavy and glossy, which is a different type of card stock. It's a very long story, but essentially people are claiming that they would gladly pay 80 or more for the wavy version of LOB. But and it's interesting actually, we're going to have a PWCC block where there's 1. So very soon we will see the truth, unless that also gets chilled.
It's going to go to 1 million this time.
Yes.
I was watching, there was one specific auction on PWCC. They've really been cracking down on shill bidders there.
Yes.
But there was one specific auction where it got so bad that like 3 booster boxes in Pokemon went up and they like went for like 200,000, 1 million. They were all jungle, like first edition. Just people messing, you know, just people just, you know, playing a joke. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that over time in Yu-Gi-Oh. One question I have is what happens if they stop? So I have a few questions. What happens if they stop reprinting all this stuff? Yeah. You know, and how much unlimited is out there? The other thing is that unlimited, it comes in different forms, right? So to get that original unlimited LOB booster box, for example, they don't reprint that booster box. That is that vintage item, right? They reprint it in blister packs or other
blisters and so forth. Yes. So if they stop reprinting, well, firstly, I don't know why they would.
Yeah.
Like that's as long as there's demand. And even then there's so much out there, and we don't know as long as that PSA backlog doesn't come back, like when LOB Blue started going up, the amount of people that bought that out from TCG Player, like the Unlim, the modern Unlim, and started subbing that in is mind-blowing. And like the last PWCC batches have been so weak because they have all been modern Unlims, not selling for much. And then people go, oh, the market's weakening. And like the market will weaken, in my opinion, but it's not those cards. It's just those cards were never wanted in the first place. At least by, the big collectors who are willing to spend the big bucks. Obviously, if you want just, affordable cards, it's great. But I don't know. I think a massive amount of the Yu-Gi-Oh backlog is those modern Unlims. And so I don't know. I wouldn't spec on them.
Yeah. And are there different, can you tell the difference between the older Unlims and the newer Unlims? Is there a way to tell the difference?
Yes. But the problem is that it's hard for people who aren't into it. So where in Pokemon you might have your little set symbol that's just different, and I know you don't do reprints the same way, but there's like very telltale signs usually. In Yu-Gi-Oh it's like, oh, you see that comma, it's supposed to be a different place. And it's like, well, good luck. Obviously if you're more seasoned, you notice the color is also slightly different. But it's like if you're not into that stuff, it's really hard to tell. Like I often get people sending me their Yu-Gi-Oh card pictures and they go, how much is it worth? And I go, well, they're fake. And then they ask, how can you tell? And I'm like, I can tell. Anyone can tell these are fake. Whereas if you show me fake Pokemon cards, I got to really double take to see that, which is like, you got to, I don't know, you need to be around these cards a lot to automatically have those things. And it's the same with the Unlim. A regular person sees an Unlim and it's the same thing, whether it's from 2002 or 2020. And so for that reason, I feel it's very dangerous because some people are saying, oh, people will go back to the originals. But it's like, well, first of all, first edition is the original. But then secondly, a lot of people can't even tell the difference between the originals. So I don't know. I just feel like these types of markets are so risky already. It's like, are you really going to add risk onto risk onto risk just to get a cheaper price? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it depends on the price point, the popularity, and the amount of reprints. It just in my mind, thinking right off the top of the bat. So, for example, in Pokemon for Evolutions, where you have the Evolutions PSA 10 and PSA 9 going for like at one point only like half the price or a third the price of the Unlimited. That's very, very close, base set from original versus in Yu-Gi-Oh where you might have it be, $40,000 versus 50. That's a considerable difference, right? Where it becomes a lot more interesting of an idea to maybe buy that $50, item. Now the question is, how much of that item is there? How much of there is it going to always be? And then how much demand, and is the demand going to grow enough to ever be able to absorb all the supply out there? Or will there just always be more of the cards than there is ever demand? And so it'll never go up.
So my thing is like, sorry for interrupting. So my thing is like, whenever people are saying about like the cheapest stuff, like, oh, but this will keep on going up. My big question in like Pokemon October was like, how much more attention do you think you'll get? Like when people say, oh, demand will keep going up, I think the most important thing is that people's income levels goes up. And that's the important one. Like I'll be able to spend more on certain cards 20 years from now or 15 years from now than right now. But like, if this collectible boom didn't make your card more expensive, I don't know what can. Like there's never going to be another moment where every most popular creator ever is opening up cards and you have to watch because you can't go outside. Like I can't even imagine that. So it really has to, for me, be an equation of income level going up and, people just aging into the ability to spend and compete on prices rather than overall zeitgeist awareness increasing, let's say.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think my counter argument would be that it may have done a lot of damage on the sealed stuff and on the cards that now so many of them are being graded that we're getting a lot of that product bought and put into people's collections. And so next time there's a huge boom, there might be less of that left. So I think that even if the price doesn't go up, you can make progress towards the point where it might go up, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I think about the same thing with the Korean Yu-Gi-Oh that I've talked about. It's like, if you get, and I think the same thing happened with Evolutions, for example. I don't think Evolutions ever would have gone up if it wasn't for Logan Paul. I'm going to throw that out there. I think Evolutions didn't move at all. There was a huge boom. Everything in Pokemon tripled in price. Evolutions still $100 a box, 90 to $100 a box, because it was the most printed set. There were endless amounts on eBay. There were tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of boxes sitting there. So I think the rational person at that point would say, just like you, it's never going to go up. And I think that that's the right, or that there's a huge risk that it's never going to go up because there isn't going to be enough demand. Then what happened was Logan Paul came out and there was just enough speculative demand and craziness that may not be sustainable, that it ate up the $50 million of Evolutions, which is insane to think about. You know, it was able to gobble it all up. Now the question is, can Yu-Gi-Oh ever have a period like that is to that extent? If you threw $50 million, $100 million at like unlimited, all unlimited PSA product, maybe 200 million, maybe 500 million over the next 20 to 30 to 40 years, is it possible? And then you have to think about the likelihood of that, what the vintage is going to do, and then the multiples that you would receive back. So for me, there'd be more of a case to buy into that card at $50 than there would be in Pokemon, where you're buying it at like 1,500 to 5,000. But even so, it still may make no sense because it just makes more sense to go for that safer route, all those sorts of things. So what do you're definitely the Yu-Gi-Oh expert here, not me, and know the market much better than me. But what do you think about that thought experiment as an idea, as a concept?
So there's a lot of points there to unpack. So firstly, I did say that I don't see the amount of awareness getting to this point again. But that doesn't mean the supply hasn't been affected. So I agree with you that the supply will now have, taken a huge hit, and that will definitely affect price in the long term. But I don't think the amount of people critically aware of cards as a thing, well, it might rival it, but I don't see how it can, double or something like that. Because like every kid was doing cards suddenly, you would have to have some crazy catalyst to have more than every kid do cards at one point, if that makes sense.
I think it would need to be multiple generations, I think is the way that you would see it. So you'd have to see like a whole new generation wanting that original stuff. Yep. And I think, in the unlimited stuff. And I think that I don't know Yu-Gi-Oh well enough to get a sense of that. I think in Pokemon, there's certainly young kids. I think people overestimate actually right now. I think the hobby's mostly adults. But I think people do overestimate a little bit how many kids are into it or as manic about it as we were when we were kids in Pokemon specifically.
Yeah, I agree.
And maybe the same thing's happening in Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm not sure. But that would be the one argument. But then where I get into it with people, and it's nice to actually not be the only bearish, it's nice that we both think about these things so we can have a little bit of back and forth. I'm always the one who's like making the other argument. Yeah. Because often I'm talking with someone who's like, these things will definitely all be $1 million in a year. And I have to be like, well, let's think about like all the risks that some Yu-Gi-Oh is presenting here. And,
2 bears in a chat.
Yeah, and all of the hurdles. So I get to play make the bullish argument, the more bullish argument around this. I think the point though then becomes, is it then worth it? And if that best case scenario happens to the unlimited stuff, where's the other stuff going to be?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where it comes back to that. It's like, if the 3 generations of Yu-Gi-Oh collectors are in it, are you going to see the most return on that $50 card or the most return on that higher end card? And I think that even if you're going to see more return on that 50, maybe, which I do think is possible, because of there just aren't going to be that many people who can afford a $500,000 card versus, a $50 card could easily go up to 500 or whatever, much more easily and be absorbed by hundreds of thousands of interested people. the other issue then is the risk, because if you think that these more blue chippy vintage cards, they don't need those multiple generations, they'll probably just go up with the same group of nutty, crazy nerds like us, just getting more and more money. Like, you know, you don't need more people. It's just a matter, to your point, that more money piece. And I think that all of that's just very important to consider when you're trying to figure out.
I agree.
What you're doing.
But I think it's very important. 2 points: that your rate of return might be better, but that is not the only thing I care about. Because if you buy a card that's $5 and it goes to 10, is it even worth for you to start finding a buyer and to ship it out, go to your post office, do all of this stuff? Oh no, it got lost. Do I really have to start making phone calls for it? Like, when you start working in these tiny items, and let's say you're 35 and you have a really great paying job and all of this, is that at any point worth it for your time? Maybe it is. It depends on your situation, right? Like, if you just got laid off, maybe that's your great side hustle and that's awesome for you. But if you have your wife and kids and you're having a good career and so forth, then it's really not worth it. So that's a very important one. The rate of return isn't just everything. And then secondly, while it is possible for cheap items to balloon up in value, can they stay ballooned? Because, like, sure, if Evolutions goes from 500 to 1,000, that might be great. But if you're still holding at 1,000 and then it stops being 1,000, that's still not very great. So, like, while Unlim might perform, you know, because of some speculative frenzy at a point, I can also see it going Beanie Baby bust, and that's like
absolutely
kind of where I'm going. But still, like, I'm still bullish overall. Like, I wouldn't be making this channel if I wasn't net bullish. You know, it's just that I want to be very careful.
That's what happened with sports cards and comic books, is that there was a speculative frenzy on the modern stuff, and then there was just way more printed and way more made than there was demand. And now I think that another key point in there is, like, we're talking maybe 20 to 40 years. There's a good argument, a really solid argument to be made that Blue Eyes that you're buying right now for $50, $100 could maybe even outperform some of the vintage stuff given the price point difference. But it's more likely that this card that's $100 is in for a long road, you know, and needs a lot of these huge catalysts. And there's so much of it, there also isn't a rush to buy it.
Yes, exactly. And that's also a big risk. I feel like people are saying, oh, it's going up. But, like, in 30 years, will you have adults who desperately want to spend like $500 on the 60th best Blue Eyes? Like, it's very possible it's just dead stock. Like, there's a lot of Beanie Babies who are worth $200, but there's no one buying. And then, like, there's still expensive Beanie Babies, by the way, that are being bought, but they are the $60,000 bears, not the $500 bears, if that makes sense. And I do like to bring that up because obviously it's like a very over the top example, but it's a good one.
Yeah, there's all sorts of bad things, you know, and then we didn't even mention, of course, as you and I both do on our channel, the difficulty to sell, you know, as you kind of mentioned a little bit in terms of the illiquidity, but also just having to sell like a bunch and finding buyers for $500, $200 cards versus just one high-end buyer for, you know, I could sell, you know, a lot of my high-end cards in a second, be extremely easy. If I crack open my binders, I have a lot of money in these like unlimited, you know, shadowless cards, but it's like, you know, much more difficult to sell, laborious, putting it together, making it look good, you know, all that added work and effort and energy you want to take into account too. And it really goes to this idea. And I think people underestimate this is when it is a pain to sell something, you don't sometimes when it's the right time to sell. And I think that you have to be very honest with yourself, and you're like, well, I knew I should have sold at the hype a lot of these cards, but I just like didn't feel like listing them all. Like I didn't feel like going through all of the work and packaging it and doing all of that stuff. And it can cause you to make really poor decisions versus a stock where you can press a button and it is gone. You know,
I actually did this. Sorry, you can finish if you want.
Please, no.
So there was this card called Dragon Master Knight, and I love the card because as a kid, I lost this auction. Like as a little kid, I lost it, and so ever since then, I want it back. And I noticed early last year, like, hey, this card is only $3. So I bought 200 copies of it. Yeah. And then it went to 80 a piece. So I was like, oh, I can start selling them. But it's like, am I gonna, and this might sound awful because it's actually decent money. I should have done it. But at the time I was scaling up my software company like extremely well to a point where like I can be like trying to sell these cards for 50, because obviously the 80 is like the all-time high. You're not getting that. So like for 50, I could do that. I could start doing that and make like insane returns. Yeah. But I could also be running my actual company, which is doing more, which is, but not everyone can say that, right? But so I lost that peak. I think that card is back down to 20 now. I'm like, well, so it's definitely very important on the lower items.
Yep. 100%. And I think that this is where there are so many people calling themselves investors that are not investors, right? Yes. Or calling themselves potential resellers who aren't actually reselling. They're just holding items, and then they go online and they have this feeling of, oh, I've made a lot of money, but they haven't made money. You have to sell it to actually, that's normal. And it's great that you shared that, because that is a extremely normal, relatable experience for a lot of people who are not doing this full time and who are not full-time resellers. Mm-hmm. And so you just have to factor that in to when you're buying these things. And it just goes to that. And we talk so much about on this channel, like, collecting what you love is so important. Yes. And if you love to own a bunch of that stuff, go for it, but don't trick yourself into thinking like this is probably the best place you can put your money to make the most return, and that you're actually going to do all the work that, and you're calculating the shipping costs and the amount of time it's going to take to get it back. Or if you need to if you need to crack all these things open, send it out to grading, figure out which ones are the 10s, which ones are the 9s, take that risk, take that chance. It's like, you can make very good money doing that, but are you actually going to do it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people really just want to buy certain things and feel good about it. So it's like a rational justification.
Absolutely.
I'm investing, you guys. It's fine. Yeah. I don't just want these cards because I like them. It's investment.
Yeah, so. And lying to yourself is great. We all lie to ourselves. But I think it can become dangerous if it's done too extremely. Mm-hmm. And also if you combine that with, it's a very addicting hobby. It's a dopamine release, getting these things, collecting, hoarding, like these things are in tandem, can become very dangerous for people. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. So maybe we should jump into some questions.
Sure.
Let's see what people are saying. Hey guys, lots of familiar faces. Thank you all for being here on this special, during the day, at least for me, here on the East Coast live stream. Part of what's nice about doing some of these live streams at different times is there are people who can like never make the Sunday live that I do every week.
Oh yeah.
And it allows some people to jump on, which is
awesome. I would always watch Attack on Titan and then move into this this stream every time.
All right. Ernesto Alvarez says, hey guys, a question. How do you maneuver when purchasing unlimited Yu-Gi-Oh? I can never tell if it's a reprint or original. Should I only be buying first edition? So we discussed definitely portions of this, but what do you think?
I would always buy a first edition if I can afford it. I would honestly, and I don't want to say this, like, I would buy 8s and 7s of first ed before buying Unlim, but the big problem with that is that right now the PSA backlog is still waiting, and it's very possible that 7 and 8 pop is going to go way up, so those prices could go way down. Yeah. But I still feel more confident in like PSA 8s of first ed than PSA 10s of Unlim. But you can tell actually you can on YouTube go to Gezi TCG. He's a really cool YouTuber who actually did the work to identify all the little differences between an original Unlim and a new Unlim. Like literally like, oh, this comma is in a different place. Grab your ruler and figure it out with that ruler. Like that type of work he did because he consults for PSA. He's helping them identify the differences between old and new Unlim so they can properly label it. So that's a pretty good thing right there.
Yeah. Yes, that'll be huge. I mean, being able to label things correctly and the differences has been huge for the Pokemon card market. You know, for a long time they didn't label shadowless, then they finally started to. You know, these types of differences, it's huge for awareness of the differences, which is key. And then also, you know, you don't, instead of looking for that comma or whatever, you know, just being able to have it, if they can do that ever, it will make a big difference.
They started, but they make mistakes still. Yeah. So that's a problem. But
that is a problem. That is a problem. Dog Green Shiz says, "Have you sold your Dark End Dragon yet?"
No, I haven't. Yeah, some of these cards aren't as liquid in like I want to say the high mid tier. So Dark End Dragon is a trophy card. PSA 9, it's worth about $4,500, and that's like the level where it's too expensive for most people, but since it's a 9, the highest end collectors are like, oh, I don't know. So it's like it's the toughest to move, but yeah.
I'm looking forward to all this Korean stuff I bought coming. And I can open through all these different things, and I can, like, you know, I bought all through the GX, you know, the GX boxes as well. I did buy a couple of like the more modern ones by mistake because I didn't know what I was doing, and I thought that they were GX era. But
I don't think that's a problem.
It'll be fun. I don't know if there are. Do you know if there are ghost rares in Korean boxes?
There should be.
There should be. Okay, I've never seen one. But
I have never opened Korean. I do have to say that. I'm usually very English focused, but there should be. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And for those out there, maybe I'll open some Korean on the channel people want to watch. It's just like the most bang for your buck. It's unbelievable, you know, but definitely for collectors, it's a collector thing at this point. You know, unlimited. Let's just put it this way, you know, take our unlimited conversation and then times it by 20 to 30 in order for those cards to ever be graded and be worth a lot.
Yes. Do you feel like evolutions, like when evolutions went to 1,000, I was flabbergasted.
Yeah.
Because the packs themselves are still in every product ever. And so people say, oh, but it's different because it's a box. And I just can't wrap my head. Like, I get it. I get that a box is supposed to be worth more, but not this much more when everyone has the pack still.
There's no other example of that in any other collectible hobby. And to me, it's Mania. To me, people have it's completely irrational. It's divorced from fundamentals. People are not buying based on what they actually want or what they value or any sort of logic they have in their head. And it was all just, you know, so much of the value is just YouTubers hyping it and a complete misunderstanding of the product, just people not having the knowledge of what it was. And then all the big YouTuber channels who have been saying for years, it's the worst product, we hate it. Suddenly, you know, every time they would open one and it's and be like, oh, not evolutions again, you know, and everyone booing, you know.
Yes.
Completely changed the narrative. The narrative switched overnight. And we'll have to see how it all goes. You know, I think that sometimes that stuff does have staying power, and in a huge hobby, you know, it's unclear just because something is built in that sort of manner. It's unclear how much it can retrace or whatnot. You know, we've seen it retrace now to 700, which is not a big retrace at all. Like,
I agree.
That's amazing that it's holding at 700 right now, in my opinion. Amazing. Like, I would be jumping for joy if I had Evolutions boxes. Of course, these guys think it should go to 10,000 and talk constantly about how in a year or 2 years it should, you know.
I really hate this thing where
is a modern day miracle. It's a modern day Pokemon miracle, because I just know how many there are.
I just don't get it. Like, there's some people who are saying like, oh, if you bought at the top, just hold a bit longer and after a while it'll be up again. I'm like, why?
No, man, that's beginner stuff. Buy the dip. Don't just hold.
Exactly. Like, this thing just went up 1,000% and now it's down 5%. Buy the dip. It's
buy the dip. It's your last chance to buy the dip.
It's underpriced now.
The Bitcoin argument around like, no, like, you don't sell Bitcoin. Bitcoin is money. Like, you hold, like, it's money. Like, you know, Evolutions is money. Evolutions is better than having dollars.
I was actually impressed by the song that you made. The song, the vibrato. I was wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm a singer. I saw you're a musician too, which I did not know. I saw that channel. Oh
yeah. Did you check out the screaming?
I did. I watched one video.
Oh God, poor you.
Yeah, to be honest, I would not say that's never been my type of music, but I I do find like the shows and like the mosh pits and everyone bumping into each other and as kind of fun. I went to one and it was like, this is like intense and crazy and wild a little bit tough for me. But I could appreciate it, and I could appreciate just like how much people were into it. And I love when people are just like super passionate about whatever it is they're doing. And I love like subcultures and people who are like super passionate about their niche.
Yeah.
So although it's not my thing, I totally like I like the whole.
Oh yeah, I just love that type of music. It's so aggressive. Like going to the gym and listening to that is. But it's also a proof of concept, by the way. So the music is written completely with MIDI instruments. Like it's all fake, and it's all products made by my company. So it's like I can show off like the song and go like, look, all these guitars are all this sampler. Go buy it now. So
let's see. Watsy Fetish says, is it accurate to say that Yu-Gi-Oh has more players than collectors?
Yes, absolutely. Like Yu-Gi-Oh is so player driven. Yeah, it's not even close. It's mostly players.
It'll be interesting to see if that remains true forever.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on if the company keeps growing the game, right? Like if the game at one point, quote unquote, dies, I do think collectors will take over, because this card I don't own because I'm going to put it in my deck. I own it because it's part of my childhood. And so at that point, if the game could die, sure, then collectors would take over. But beyond that, I do see players being the majority forever.
Yeah. I mean, you know so much more about Yu-Gi-Oh than me. Like, just like my having not knowing, like I would feel like this whole, I'm just bullish on this idea that like people are going to, like adults are going to be collecting cards a lot more and collecting these like pop culture type cards for a while. It may end up dying for sure. And that Yu-Gi-Oh is going to be a huge winner of that. It's going to be Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and then third, I think, is going to be DBZ probably.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you not think Magic would be third, or?
I don't know in terms of value, I'm not saying, but in terms of the ones that are going to see the bump from all of this.
Right. Okay.
Because I think it's a pop culture IP movement. I think it's why you saw Marvel cards go up, Star Wars cards, across the board. It was anything that has like a pop culture media franchise that has, I think it's why we're seeing Magic start to partner with, and have, what is it? They had like God, I don't even know. Where they have Godzilla or
yeah, I don't know if that was official, but they had that Walking Dead thing, right?
Walking Dead one, yeah. And I think that they're going to do more of that, in part because they realize what's going on. Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for questions, I have an announcement. People, if you have Darkrai and Cresselia, I'm looking for a PSA 10. The one spooky drawing Darkrai. No one has it. There's like a
which one specifically do you want?
It's like it's the two art part thing. You have like Darkrai and Cresselia Legends.
Sure.
Is what it's called.
I have that.
Really, in PSA 10? Because I saw
I'd have to check.
Okay. Because I saw one for $500 at one point, but I found that too much. But it might have already sold for that now.
I don't have all of them in PSA 10, so I might not have that one. I can check after. Cool. I'm not going to have a double though, so unfortunately, I probably will not be parting. I could probably put with a 9. Should we make a deal on the live stream? First ever live.
What are you looking for? Let's go.
That would actually be hilarious content, and like would be kind of super interesting to see like how people actually make deals.
I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. Like usually for Yu-Gi-Oh, I have a lot of mid and high end stuff, but I don't have a lot of like. I mean, I have stuff like I can check, but it just depends on what you're looking for. Yeah,
I'm definitely gonna like. Once I learn more about Yu-Gi-Oh and figure out what I like exactly, I'm definitely going to be looking to like make more friends in the Yu-Gi-Oh community and do hopefully some high-end trades of Pokemon to Yu-Gi-Oh, if there are people who are interested in that sort of thing.
I would be. I'm actually looking for some Pokemon stuff, but
so that's always part of why I was buying so much and so many doubles and all these sorts of things, because I knew that also use this stuff for trade bait if the stuff ever blew up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also like I bought certain cards because I knew there was a strong run up coming, and I wanted to be part of it, but the cards that I was looking for weren't available at the time. And so as long as those cards would appreciate at the market, I know I would be able to convert that into Yu-Gi-Oh money to then get the cards that I did want. So
I think what's great too about trading, particularly in this type of environment, is it's instead of putting more cash out there, it's like we're probably trading overly inflated assets to each other, so it's even, it's even. It's like we're
both bag holders.
Yeah, exactly. They're probably both somewhat overinflated, so no one's getting it hurt.
Yeah.
Either item is probably going to retrace. Although we'll see. Hopefully not too much more, particularly with the rare stuff at this point, at least in Pokemon.
Yeah, it's actually something that I've been very interested in. I put dates in my calendar where I'm like, at that date, buy certain Pokemon cards. Because like they're gonna dip too low, in my opinion. Too many people are gonna suddenly be bears.
I have some good friends who are like, I'm gonna save up cash for 8 months. I'm not gonna buy anything, and then I'm not even gonna look. And then in 8 months, I'm gonna look, and then I'm gonna see where it's at, and then make some decisions. And I think that is an interesting way to do things. Mm-hmm. I'm more of like, first of all, I'm an addict, so I need to like, I like watching and seeing what's going on and love it. So for me to just like tune it out, I love doing this. So it's too hard for me to do that, but I am good at not buying. I luckily I can get my fix in part by just like watching, opening
Korean
and looking at my cards, buying Korean. Yeah. And part of what I was talking to one of my friends about this, part of my justification for buying all this Korean is just thinking of how much money this is saving me from not opening expensive vintage packs that I might open. It's like,
oh yeah, opening Yu-Gi-Oh is brutal. Like in Pokemon, 1 out of 3 packs is a hit, right? In Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like, well, a holo, like whatever. Like if you open a box of base, you're likely getting a Charizard, right?
Yeah, particularly with vintage, it's very true. Where
Yes, but like in Yu-Gi-Oh, you open LOB, 24 packs, 2 of them are going to be ultras. It's like,
dude, I can't imagine. I was watching one of Ruxin. Shout out to I love Ruxin's channel, and Yu-Gi-Oh Tube also. Love both of them. I was watching one of Ruxin's like the cybernetic dragon opening, and I was like, oh god. I think it was like a $200 value he got from the packs, and it was like, I forget how many, but like really expensive, like $8,000 hobby box or something crazy expensive. I was just like, to open an $8,000 box and get $200 back in value, and for that to be like probably not that uncommon. Like, I mean, he did get a particularly bad box, but like,
yes,
like, there are a lot of cards that he could have pulled in those slots that would have been the same extremely low value. It's sort of like
cards about that. I had a podcast with Yu-Gi-Oh Tube about Cybernetic Revolution like 2 weeks before that. And we were rating all the cards. And at one point I was going, oh, UFO, I love that card as a kid, blah, blah, blah. And Yu-Gi-Oh Tube went like, no, that's stupid. And Ruxin commented, oh, UFO sucks. And I told him, you're going to pull it now, man. And he pulled it live on stream. I was dying. I feel bad for him, but it was just the karma of that. It was so funny. Like,
oh, yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, Ruxin. I mean, Ruxin's the man for opening, for like paying all that money for that stuff and then opening for people. Like that's crazy. Particularly like at his size, like to not be like a multi-millionaire. Like if you have 1 million plus subscribers and you're getting hundreds of thousands of views per video, you're in AdSense money, you're making that plus more on that. But to like open it at that size, like he's a man.
Yeah. I mean, it is growing his channel at an incredible rate, but still, it's like,
I'm sure,
an insane investment.
Yeah. And hopefully he has Patreon supporters, and I'm sure he has people supporting him. I don't think so, but but that's, and it's really a treat to see those types of boxes. It's the same, those boxes, as I said before, it's the same thing that I really compare them to like those gold stars, in the sense of like, you open one of those boxes, it is gold star or bust. I mean, you can pull the EXs, which are definitely have gone up in value, but like it's like a 15, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 box potentially. You know, if you're doing like Deoxys, it's like a $50,000 box, and you could easily get an expected value of like 1,500, 1,000. You know, you could, you know.
What are the odds of a gold star? Like
1 in 72.
1 in 72 packs or boxes?
Yeah. Packs.
Packs. Okay.
That would be really cool if it was boxes.
1 in 72 packs, and you have how many packs per box? Is it 36?
36, and then depending on the set, you have a certain number of gold stars. So to pull the you know, the specific most expensive gold star. Now the good thing about it is that all the gold stars have good value. So it's not like Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm amazed at this, where like you pull like those, like it's amazing to me that like the ultimate rares he pulled were like $20, and then like yeah, and then the cybernetic dragon is like, I don't know how much that's worth, but so much more. You know, it's amazing. Yes. The difference. And to me, that shows the lack of collector base so far in Yu-Gi-Oh! But I wonder if that collector base grows. Like those would be the types of plays that I might look at, depending. And I don't know enough. I need to learn about Yu-Gi-Oh! So like, you know, because that doesn't make sense in terms of the pull rate, in terms of the expense of the box, in terms of the difficulty to get those cards in gem mint condition, how low the prices are. So yeah, I need to go, you know, learn so much, but
like very hot take. A lot of ultimate rares in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are way too underpriced, and like we're so far in. Anyone who's still watching, thank you so much. But like that UFO-roid, I hit up Rux and I was like, I'll pay double market right now, because I'm like, this card is mint. I'm gonna grade this. This is gonna be a 9 at least, and it might be a 10 for an ultimate rare that no one's able to pull right now because the boxes are so expensive. And he declined. But like,
I thought it was a cool looking card.
Yeah. And there's so many.
I didn't see that, and I was like, ugh, you know.
Yeah.
The type of reaction you guys have.
And at $20, it's like whatever.
I had the ugh reaction when I saw the price. I can tell you that much. For him, my heart, I was like, oh no. $23 on the screen. I'm like, oh my God, you know. Whew, that's painful.
Yeah, I was willing to pay double because it was mint. You know, like most near mints on TCG player are, you know.
Yeah, it can be a very hit or miss there.
Mm-hmm.
Often more miss, particularly these days. It used to be a little more hit. But when things are cheaper. All right, Pokedynamics says, thoughts on the classic reprint packs? I've been collecting them sealed for a while now. Anytime I was able to pick them at MSRP at my local big box store. So maybe we've touched on reprints. Yeah,
so those are the unlimbs that we were talking about earlier. The Walmart reprints, let's say.
Yeah, people are asking a lot of reprint questions. Probably before we had the conversation, they were just throwing these good questions in.
I mean, the thing is, like, I would probably flip them because a lot of people are paying like quadruple MSRP for them. So if you could get them at MSRP and just, you know, flip them for profit, maybe put that profit into a really nice first ed card or something, or hold. I don't know. I don't want to tell people to hold because I can't in good conscience tell people to do that because I don't know with any amount of certainty that that's a good strategy.
Yeah. It's this, honestly, like the people who were telling people to buy Evolution's booster boxes, it was really like, it was bad advice. Like they got very, like, I'm just going to say it's pretty blunt, but they got very lucky. Like it would be the same thing as saying like, now's the time to buy unlimited. And then all of a sudden the supplies, unless you have some insider knowledge, you know, it's just very lucky because they had no idea. In fact, I probably had more knowledge than a lot of, you know, I definitely had more knowledge than a lot of them about how many pallets some of my friends and people I knew were sitting on, you know, thousands and thousands of boxes that they were all able to sell out, you know, at $400, $500, $600. And just to predict that is crazy. Like, you know, and I think that although it's a possible scenario with this type of thing, as we're saying, it's the same type of event that would need to happen. And so you just have to understand that. And I think if you're cool with that risk and you love this and you like it, you know.
Yeah, of course. Like if you love like those risky plays and it's money you can afford to lose, like go ahead, right? Like like we spoke before, Cardfight Vanguard is a game I love to play. And so over the years, I have accrued some of these cards that I really like. But sometimes I also just buy cards because I'm like, if this market ever exists, it's ridiculous that I just bought a first set card that's probably pop less than 1,000 for $5. That makes no sense. So if it ever exists, cool. But I'm well aware it could go nowhere.
Yeah. Jody Matoma has a good question about what would you think about full arts in Yu-Gi-Oh? Is that, they've have the same card layout, right? What if they changed the layout, did full arts, did some different sorts of things? How do you feel about that?
I've spoken about it before. It makes no sense to me that Yu-Gi-Oh hasn't done it yet.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Pokemon has done it, MTG has done it, and Yu-Gi-Oh, I get that's like super iconic. Like the look is like this card, everyone knows that's a Yu-Gi-Oh card. But on the other hand, the anime is always full art. Like all the cards, I don't know if you've ever seen the anime, are, you have your box here and then everything else is art. So I don't get how they haven't done like an anime edition type of rarity. So
I'm gonna have to watch it again. I didn't notice that it was any different. Yeah, that's cool. I've certainly watched like every episode a bunch of times, but
crazy.
Yeah. Let's see. But yeah, I think that's a great question and would be an interesting idea for them to do.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know anything about the Darkrai promo that's in the movie? So like there's this thing, and I again, I'm very newbie to Pokemon. I have this Darkrai level 50.
Oh yeah.
So the thing is, in America, it was foil. And in select countries in Europe, it wasn't. And this one isn't. And I can barely find them like anywhere. So it's probably not worth much because I have found some for like 10 or 20 bucks. But I don't know how I don't know how much rarer it would be. So I don't know if you know that. But
I want to say DJ Gigabyte, who's far more knowledgeable on Pokemon than me, might have an answer. If you go to DJ Gigabyte's channel, I feel like he might have done a video on that at some point. This is like the type of information that I like once knew, but there's so many cards like that I like. It like flows in and out sometimes. So I don't remember exactly, but it rings a bell, and I feel like I saw a video. Talk about an underrated channel full of knowledge.
DJ Gigabyte looks like a rapper. Is there some?
I think people can't find it. I think that's part of it, because like when I type in DJ Gigabyte, it doesn't come up either. Yeah,
that's so weird.
DJ, it's all one word, DJ, and then and maybe type in Pokemon too.
Now I found him. Yeah.
He's just like, he's an old school guy. He was one of like the creators of E4, the E4 forum. And just has like, he has lots of videos about all sorts of things. So you'd have to type in and try to, it might be difficult to locate that one. Also on E4 is another place to try to find that type of information, or Bulbapedia. That has a lot of the history, that sort of thing. I'm constantly referring to those things for those sorts of like niche types of questions, particularly for cards that I don't particularly collect or go after. But the thing about Pokemon is there are a lot of things like that are potentially undervalued, that in the long run, as people learn about them or learn about some of those niche things, more people may want or gravitate towards. So definitely knowledge is key. And as a Darkrai collector, you got to know all of the Darkrai.
Exactly.
There's no excuse, man. There aren't that many.
I'm not trying to like speculate on Darkrai, but like as a kid, I had a Darkrai collection. It was a figurine and 3 cards. So I was like, oh, this is a Darkrai collection. So like now I'm like, well, if Pokemon's gonna crash, I might as well, pick up some cheap, cool Darkrai's that I enjoyed as a kid. But
Darkrai's great. Let's see what we got here.
The Hidden Fates one is so cool, but it's like way too expensive for what it is. Maybe I'm wrong on that. What's your take on that? It's a modern card, so I feel like it needs to go down the drain at some point, but maybe I'm totally wrong.
Let's look up the price here. People are speculating hard on Hidden Fates right now. There are people who are hoarding Hidden Fates product. Like,
yeah, I know. And people are asking like 250, 400 for a PSA 10, and I'm like, nah.
Yeah. And there are businesses that are specking hard on it and holding a tons.
Oh.
Yeah. Some with like potential insider knowledge about like reprinting. Just gonna throw it out there. Like that's for what it is. Like when businesses like that keep a lot of the product and hoard a lot of the product, it makes me think like, do they know that it's not being reprinted? Why are they hoarding that one and not the other one? But
yeah.
Nobody knows for sure. But some of these guys, So, oh, what am I doing? I just looked up the Hidden Fates Elite Trainer box. Hidden Fates Darkrai. Let's take a look at the price. You want a PSA 10, of course.
Yes, I mean they're all so cheap, so
only the best for Solemn.
Wow, but they're also like they're cheap, but they're also too expensive for modern, or in my opinion.
So it looks like I see one sold at 160, a few at 160. Here's one at 120 that went 120, another one in 120. Here's one at 190, 170. It's kind of 120 to 200, we could say.
Oh, for a PSA 10, I haven't seen any of that. Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there are worse buys.
Yeah, but there's also a lot better.
They're definitely better buys. If you like the card, I think that these cards, the market is definitely recognizing like and understanding finally that like the amount that's going to come back, and like and I think the broader market isn't even aware. So yeah, we're gonna see. There's probably a better time to buy, but at 120, if you get it like 100, 120, honestly, with grading fees being where they're at like $50,
yeah,
it's not that much money if you want the card, for your collection, because getting a PSA 10 is no sure thing. And, even if you could buy like a few, you could get a bunch of those. Maybe you could get them like maybe $10 raw, and you could have like you could have a bunch of chances at it, and you could like sell off the nines. Like there's a way to do it where you could like you could make money probably, or like,
yeah, but it's still gonna be worth the time.
It's not worth the time, so it's like, and there are better opportunities. I don't even deal in that stuff because it's just like, it's just not worth any of it. Like, and I respect people who do that and the hustle and making money that way. But, I'm just above that. No, oh my God.
No, I respect that hustle, and it depends on where you're like at in life, right? Like if you are flipping Pokemon cards right now and you're going to put that money towards some business idea that you have, like, cool, enjoy. But if you need to be aware that you're doing that and that that's your goal.
Yeah.
Someone says
I did that, to be fair, when I started, so
yeah, it makes sense.
I think it also doing that, in all seriousness, teaches you some really important skills that apply at whatever level you're doing this at.
Yes. Forces going to research.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Research, doing the math, the margins, getting a sense of how turning these ungraded cards into graded, what type of margin do you need to really make that worth it, given the risk at 9s versus 10s.
How easy
buying random cards on eBay, how often do they come damaged, the time of having to send that card back, all that sort of stuff. It really teaches you all the things you don't learn if you're just like buying and thinking I have money now.
Yes, exactly. Oh, someone says I'm going to send you a Hidden Fates Darkrai, Solemn. Yes, let's go. This is a moment. My collection is growing.
It was all worth it, man.
Thank you so much.
That's why you come on Pokenomics.
We go.
Your free chase card from the chat.
Oh, someone asks, please elaborate on the level of simpness in Yu-Gi-Oh. I think that's pretty important, actually. Yeah. So, how in Pokemon all your full art girls were bought out at one point? Because everyone was like, oh, these girls and so forth. So it makes little sense to me, because most people who are into Pokemon have like a surface level interest. So they're mostly into the Pokemons. They didn't really ever care much for the trainers. But then I also understand the simpness for it, because men, and this sounds awful, but men have always wanted women in their art. Like 1600 paintings, there's women in that, and people are like, oh yeah, that's so distinguished. But somehow when it's modern art, then suddenly it's simping. Like I think there's actually an argument for simping in art, and I think it might actually work out.
Yeah, I mean, I have to think more about it. My first reaction is like, ick. Like,
yes, of course, I get that.
Like when people started buying those up, it was like, it's an animated character. Like,
yes, of course, yeah.
And also like a lot of them are kids, and
no,
so I like
absolutely.
It's just kind of like this is just like And listen, I'm all for immaturity and stupidness and ridiculousness, and I think a lot of the people involved in that are not my age. It's more younger people, and and they're being ridiculous and having fun and goofing around, and I'm all for that. So, and I think most of it's just harmless and not serious. Yeah. I do think on your trainer point, I actually think trainers have been very undervalued historically in Pokemon because people really do like the specific trainer characters, or not even necessarily like, for example, like Professor Oak or certain things that are just like such important characters in the anime and the stories. And I think that, like for me, like in the Gym Heroes Gym Challenge sets, you can get hollow versions of the trainers. And I liked those cards. Those are always like the cards people hated to get that as a hollow. I like them, so I think we'll have to see at the end of the day. Those are really underpriced. Those have actually outperformed in some cases some of the Pokemon because they were really very low. And then people realized that some of them were really hard to grade, and some of them were like the most popular Pokemon, like Brock and Misty and
but like I was very close to buying a PSA 10 Cynthia at one point because like as a kid I played the game, the Nintendo DS Diamond Pearl. I was like, Cynthia is so damn cool, and then
I mean that's a really cool card. That Hidden Fate Cynthia is really cool. If that's the one you're going to buy, is a
but
card.
I don't want to spec on it because, well, it's still modern, but I'm not against all modern, by the way, but
I mean, like I have a modern collection, unfortunately I haven't been able to buy or add to it because things just have been like, I just won't buy things, I'll just buy a bunch of Korean Yu-Gi-Oh, or it's just part of why I started collecting all these other TCGs is it's just like, I love collecting and there's just much more value over here. And for me, I don't feel like I need, I don't feel like any big law. Like for me, it's like, I'll just open the next Pokemon set, or eventually when they print enough, I'll just open it. For me, there isn't like any loss of like, I can't open the latest one that everyone's talking about. I respect and understand that for some people, they do feel that way. And it really sucks. Just for me, it's like, I just don't like, I'm not persuaded by like, oh my God, like check out this. It's like, people just move on to the next thing. And the thing about modern is very few things are going to be memorable because there's going to be so much, and it's going to be that like so many of these sets that everyone is psyched about, or so many of these releases, no one's going to be talking about in 5 to 10 years. They're going
absolutely. It's also why I'm not buying it right now because like even if she's like what $200 in a PSA 10, I'm like, I see a future where she's 50 and I will buy her at 50. But I don't see this holding in any way. Like this backlog is still massive. So he says it was a serious question. He wanted us to elaborate on the simping question. I think there's an argument. I think Dark Magician Girl, Mystical Elf, and so forth will outperform non-girl cards because men or boys, whatever you want to say, will overpay for the simpery.
Well, you definitely have like people who just collect Dark Magician Girl for sure. Like probably a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they have like 50 card. Or 100 or whatever. Yeah. And
any product with her on sells better.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it is what it is. It is what it is.
Like sleeves, binders, they keep putting her on. Like I don't know how much you follow modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but Ghosts from the Past doubled in MSRP when the rumor of Dark Magician Girl being in there surfaced.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So
gotta love that Dark Magician Girl.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. So I can do about like 15 more minutes. Is that cool with you?
Whatever you want.
And we'll end. And then I have to get back to my my work day.
Sure.
Let's see. Lots of questions here. Let me just grab some from the middle.
Someone says Cynthia is so damn cool. Yeah, it's because I was about to swear, and so I had to like hold it in. Yeah, and take a look to see if there are any questions you feel like answering. I can answer anything. If you have questions or you want to talk about anything, it's all cool.
I feel like we had a great discussion.
Yeah, likewise.
And I'd definitely be interested in, I want this channel to feature other TCGs and other sorts of things occasionally. So I'm definitely interested in both me learning and being able to do it, but also maybe hosting some roundtable discussions at some point with a few Yu-Gi-Oh tubers to just like discuss the state of Yu-Gi-Oh, like all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I definitely think that like the core of this channel is going to be people who are interested in a lot of,
Yeah, of course. I just think it's useful to know like so much stuff. Like the growth in, for example, GX was very comparable to the growth in Gold Stars. Like people caught on later that rarity matters, and then a lot of people like loved those. And so their growth was like slower than everything else, but at one point it ramped up and outsped it. And there's so many like little analogies that are just useful to be aware of.
Here's a question for you. Is there as much of a rush to get the modern chase Yu-Gi-Oh cards graded as there is with Pokemon? What's the Yu-Gi-Oh's community view on grading as a whole? I think the question being not like, is it smart to rush, but like, do you think, is there a lot of rush? And do you think that there's as much rush as there is in Pokemon?
The rush exists, but it's not as big. So for example, you guys had your Champions Path Charizard that went PSA 10 to pop 5,000 in like this. We had a similar card called 10,000 Dragon, which was being hyped as though it's the 10,000th ever card. It's a special rarity. It's only one per case. It's super rare, blah, blah, blah. But because of that, everyone was aware of the chase and kept it in great condition and instantly started subbing it. So half the pop is tens. However, the pop is still like under 100. So it's not like in Pokemon where the Charizards are like at 5,000. There's not that many people doing it yet, but the same phenomenon works. And just like, I think in Pokemon, you guys say, short-term flip, long-term dip, or something like that on certain modern cards, where you grade your Champions Path Charizard, it sold for like 5,000 on release, and then now it's down to 800 or 500 or something like that. Very similar with 10,000 Dragon. The first 10 sold for 4,800. Now it's down to 2,700. So very similar, just not as big.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, that it's the same pattern. Yep, that's valuable info for me. Michael Bowerman asks, any suggestions for someone who's collected for the last 4 years and wants to sell for the first time to move capital into higher tier items? I've never sold before and I want to protect myself where possible.
That's tough because I'm in a, like by having the channel, I'm in a weird position where I can find buyers much more easily, right?
Yeah.
And people are also less willing to mess with me because they're like, well, you know, he knows a thing or two, you know, they're because of that authority, let's say. So it's hard to put myself in a position, but I think getting to know people on Instagram and such platforms is huge. We don't have an E4. We do have the Discord in the link in my description, which is just open to everyone. It's not a fan Discord. It's just everyone's talking about it's E4 Discord for Yu-Gi-Oh. Let's call it that. So selling there, Facebook groups, just the more people you're exposed to, the more likely that you're going to find a bunch of buyers. And as far as protection goes, at first I would film every single package I package. It might be like extra work, but at least if you're so insecure about stuff going wrong, then at least you have that. So you can show to PayPal if they try to do some weird chargeback, like, no, look, I shipped this, here's the label, here's everything. And then once you've done a few sales, you notice, hey, there's not that many people trying to fraud me. And then maybe you'll, calm down and decrease those measures is what I think is a good way to go about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right on the money, and particularly your first point. And I'm so spoiled too, as well, just with my last few sales. I get contact I don't even have to actively try to sell stuff a lot of the time. People just contact me asking to buy my cards.
Yeah.
It's heaven. I mean, it's like, and then I'm like, and I can ask the prices that I want generally, and people are often willing to pay them.
Yeah.
And I think that there's certainly part of that is the respect factor, the trust factor, the fact that I don't charge outrageous prices and I'm fair and I explain, why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I'm willing to sell. And I also don't sell crap to people, and I offload things. I do that through my secret eBay account. And Facebook
Oh.
would be, just like gonna be offloading those evolution Charizards when they get back, and I don't know.
Oh God.
So I think, for someone new, it's really about, building those relationships on Instagram, starting a social media, starting to build, dealing with trusted people, trying to sell to trusted people, because you can get scammed too, building up your eBay account, getting the feedback, all that stuff. And just like, don't be afraid to just kind of start and start small and be patient. I would say, don't stress yourself out. Don't try to be in too much of a rush. Maybe start with some lower end items first to sell, and just to kind of get comfortable. You don't want to by accidentally throw something up for a low price, for a lower than you should price, that's very expensive, or a high end item when you're not used to it, or you don't know exactly what you're doing. So, get familiar with eBay, how the whole process works on a cheap item where there's just lower stakes, lower risk. That sort of thing I recommend for people. I start a YouTube channel, really. I mean, or go on to E4 and meet people and connect with people. So I've got a question for you before we end.
Sure.
If you have someone like me, and I bet there are a number of people here in the chat, probably similar to me, who are experienced in Pokemon or experienced in investing and collecting and doing those sorts of things. But they're not experienced with Yu-Gi-Oh! And they want to get into vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! Collecting for like the nostalgia, for the enjoyment. Where would you suggest they start? Where would you suggest they go to maybe learn where kind of the best information is?
Well, I know this YouTube channel.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, exactly. We were both at the same, obviously there's one place to go. Also forums and other sorts of places, and where to buy, maybe where some, give some of the insider stuff on where some of the better places to buy.
Well, there's this Instagram. So
I've heard there's, I forget the card you're trying to sell, but I've heard that there's someone's
and Dragon. Yeah. No, so you guys have one huge privilege, and that's E4. And actually, the reason I made my Discord, and it's not a Solemn Yu-Gi-Oh! It's Discord, it's just a Yu-Gi-Oh! Discord, is because we did not have a forum like that. If you wanted to find Yu-Gi-Oh! Information, you had to follow a bunch of people on Instagram, follow a bunch of YouTube channels, and get the scattered info that way. So I will just name some of those people because I do think they're amazing. So you have Gezi TCG. GHEZZI TCG. So he's just an encyclopedia of old school Yu-Gi-Oh! And he's not flashy. He's not trying to be like, oh, buy this or anything like that. He's just like, here's that one word that's 2 centimeters to the left, and that's why it's this type of, he goes really in depth that way. Sure. There's Ruxin, of course, if you just like that entertainment value and you want to learn what's in this set and so forth. Sure. There's Vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! He does a lot of mail days. He shows off insane collections. It's one of those guys who started early, and so he has a lot of the PSA 10s from back when they were super cheap and so forth. Yeah. There's Strictly Sealed is an interesting one. Yu-Gi-Oh! Tube, obviously. Yu-Gi-Oh! Tube is a huge one. I think he has the most, I want to say, information that goes back, that spans a long time. I mean, my channel has quite some info, but again, if you go to my channel, you'll have more finance, and if you go to Gezi's channel, you'll have more look at this card stock, those types of videos. Yeah, I mean, again, Instagram, Discord, those are the big ones. There's some Facebook groups, but most of them are buying and selling. Yeah. Yeah, information is really tough. It's also why I made the channel. I felt like there was no one spot that you could bring people to and say oh, here's how you learn about all of these different weird things. We don't have an E4. That's a huge challenge. I would say that 30% of Pokemon's high-end market is built on the fact that E4 has existed for years.
Yeah, I mean, I would be nowhere without SM Pratt.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not nowhere, but so much. It would have taken me so much longer without people like SM Pratt's channel initially, and then all the people on E4 that just drop these amazing articles, that are dense. They're not always the most consumable, and you have to be definitely a hardcore fan to have an interest in reading like the specific, exact card stock stuff, or all the little variations. But I love that stuff, and so I'm always thankful to the YouTube channels that I was watching when I first came on, and it's great. And it's part of why I'm doing a YouTube channel, probably part of why you're doing a YouTube channel. It's just, we're passionate about the community, about sharing knowledge, about information. And we care about people and want people to enjoy the hobby and not
want to get established
or limit that.
Like I want there to be an established proper market that's closer to coins than to Bitcoin, if that makes sense.
Yes,
that is my goal, that we have a bunch of, or like watches, that we are like, oh, look at this mechanical little thing moving, rather than, oh, it's gonna go to the moon. Like I want to move that place, if that makes sense long term.
Exactly. And that's also going to be a much more healthy market, and a much more sustainable growth type market is a market that's built around fully educated buyers who want what they're buying for the price that they're buying it at, and where they're able to hear. And I think part of the growing pains, right, is people existing in these bubbles of sort of their certain hype channel bubbles, that either the algorithm never shows them a channel like mine, or they watch one video of mine and they're like, what? Like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The smart people are all saying this, or like all the people in the know are saying this,
They're all rich and successful. This guy,
he looks terrible, he doesn't have any cards in his background. He can't know what he's talking about.
With no evolution boxes behind you. What are you doing?
He doesn't have stacks and stacks of evolutions. Yeah. But that's why, it's a grind. It's a process. And what's fun though, is you meet a lot of people, and it's a great hobby. So thank you so much for being on today. Definitely go subscribe to Solemn Yugioh's channel. I think you'll enjoy it a lot. And hopefully we'll talk more and maybe have you on again with some other Yu-Gi-Oh people. I'd love to do that, someday at some point, some sort of roundtable. And also I'm going to ask you for hopefully I'm going to use you for some Yu-Gi-Oh advice and some tips and tricks. And I'm happy to share all my Pokemon knowledge in return.
Awesome.
all that great stuff. So thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here with us today. Any last thoughts? I'll leave the floor for you for a last thought, if you have one.
Do you have Darkrai and Cresselia Legends? Hit me up.
Send me your cards. Send me your Darkrai.
Not for free, I'll pay.
Very good. All right, guys.